Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Max, and today we're going to be looking at Hume's theory of causation. So we're going to do some reading together. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to be reading from Alan Bailey and Dan O'Brien's book. If you can see this here now, hopefully you can still see it. I'll just double check. Yep, that looks good. So this book is a guidebook basically to Hume's treatise, or Hume's inquiry. And we're going to check and read section 7. I'm just going to double check that. Okay. The idea of necessary connection. When a brick causes a window to smash, we do not just have an impression of the trajectory of the brick followed by an impression of breaking glass. We also think of the brick causing or bringing about the shattering. Given the weight and path of the brick, we believe not just that the glass will break, but that it must. To say that there is a causal relation between two events, between flying bricks and breaking glass, is to say that there is a necessary connection between them. Section 7 investigates the origin of this idea. This is a quote from Hume now. There is no ideas which occur in metaphysics more obscure and uncertain than those of power, force, energy, or necessary connection. We shall therefore endeavour in this section to fix, if possible, the precise meaning of these terms, and thereby remove some part of that obscurity, which is so much complained of in these species of philosophy. Rationalists such as Descartes claim that causes have an inherent efficacy, agency, power, force, and energy, and productive quality. This explains why they necessarily bring about certain effects. This power is also intelligible, that is, we can come to know its nature, and in doing so, we are able to reason a priori that a particular cause will bring about a particular effect. Causal relations are intelligible in the same way as mathematical propositions. Reflection upon right-angled triangles reveals that the square of the hypotenuse is and must be the sum of the square of the two other sides. Such reflection also reveals that bricks of a certain size will and must break panes of glass. Quote, it must be allowed that when we know a power, we know that very circumstance in the cause, by which it is enabled to produce the effect. For these are supposed to be synonymous. We must therefore know both the cause and effect and the relation between them. But where the power or energy of any cause discoverable by the mind, we could foresee the effect, even without experience, and might at first pronounce with certainty concerning it, by the mere dint of thought and reasoning. Hume, however, denies that we can have a priori knowledge of causation. To consider the matter a priori, anything may produce anything. We must turn to empirical evidence to discover the effects of particular causes and to find the source of the idea of necessary connection. When any natural object or event is presented, it is impossible for us by any sagacity or penetration to discover or even conjecture without experience what event will return from it, or to carry our foresight beyond that object. B. The search for the impression of necessary connection. All ideas for Hume are derived from impressions. It is impossible for us to think of anything which we have not antecedently felt, either by our external or internal senses. Every idea is copied from some preceding impression or sentiment, and where we cannot find any impression, we may be certain that there is no idea. The idea of necessary connection must therefore be derived from an impression of necessary connection, from our experience of the necessary relation between causes and effects. In part 1 of this section, Hume considers 3 possible sources of this impression. First, our experience of observable causal relations, such as when a billiard ball causes another one to move. Second, the causal relation of our own minds, when, for example, my desire for coffee causes me to reach for my coffee cup. And third, cases where God is allegedly responsible for causal action. We shall find, though, that this initial search for the impression of necessary connection is unsuccessful, and in part 2 of this section, that the actual origin of this idea is rather unexpected. When I watch one billiard ball hitting another, I think that the first ball causes the second one to move. I take the movement of the two balls to be necessarily connected. Watching billiards should therefore provide me with an impression of necessary connection, and thus empirical evidence of necessity. However, to quote Hume, when we look about us toward external objects and consider the operation of causes, we are never able, in a single instance, to discover any power or necessary connection, any quality which binds the effect to the cause and renders one an infallible consequence of the other. We only find that one does actually, in fact, follow the other. The impulse of one billiard ball is attended with motion in the second. This is the whole that appears to the outward senses. Consequently, there is not, in any single particular instance of cause and effect, anything which can suggest the idea of power or necessary connection. I do not see the force of power of the first ball causing the second to move. Observation, therefore, is not the source of my impression of necessary connection. Imagine a trick billiard ball table where the two balls do not actually impact. The first ball stops just short of the second, but this is nevertheless caused to move by magnets under the table and by a steel core within the ball. The first ball does not cause the second to move. Their movements are not necessarily connected, yet to observe this illusion is indistinguishable from the normal case in which the movements of the balls are causally related. There is nothing extra to see in the causal case, and therefore the necessary connection between the two balls is not observable. If we cannot see necessity in the world, perhaps we are aware of it in the operations of our own mind. My desire for coffee causes my arm to move, and thinking of Paris causes me to form an image of the Eiffel Tower. Since these are causal relations, I may be able to find an impression of necessary connection by reflecting upon these mental processes. It may be that we are every moment conscious of internal power, while we feel that by the simple command of our will we can move the organs of our body or direct the faculties of our mind. An act of volition produces motion in our limbs or raises a new idea in our imagination. This influence of the will we know by consciousness, hence we acquire the idea of power or energy. However, reflecting upon volition, consider it on all sides. Do you find anything in it, like this creative power by which it raises from nothing a new idea? So far from being conscious of this energy in the will, it requires experience to convince us that such extraordinary effects do ever result from a simple act of volition. The means by which this is effected, the energy by which the will performs so extraordinary an operation, of this we are so far from being immediately conscious that it must forever escape our most diligent inquiry. Hume puts forward 3 arguments for why we are not aware of the causal power that our minds have over our bodies. First, if we were aware of such power, we would know how it operated. When we know a power, we know that very circumstance in the cause, by which it is enabled to produce the effect. This, however, is something that we do not know or understand. Is there any principle in all nature more mysterious than the union of soul with body, by which a supposed spiritual substance acquires such an influence over a material one, that the most refined thought is able to actuate the grossest matter? Second, if we are aware of the causal power in our mind, then we would know why it is that we can will our fingers to move, but not our liver. That is, why only some parts of our body are under our voluntary control. Being in that case fully acquainted with the power or force by which it operates, we should also know why its influence reaches precisely to such boundaries and no farther. Again, this is something that we do not know or understand. Third, the movement of my arm when I reach for the coffee is the end point of a long chain of physical processes. One link in the chain involves nerve impulses triggering the contraction of a muscle in my arm. However, I am not aware of the causal influence I have over this mechanism of necessary connection. All I feel, all I am aware of is my desire for coffee, followed by the sensory impression of my arm moving. Imagine that your nervous system has been modified by a physiologist who uses a brain scanner to detect when you have certain volitions. The neurons connecting your brain to your arm muscles have been severed, but the physiologist is able to trigger the contraction of those muscles via remote control. According to Hume, if such triggering were performed just after you willed your arm to move, then your experience of this action would be indistinguishable from that in which the usual physiological causes were operative. All you experience is A followed by B. Volitions followed by actions. You do not have a sensory impression of those actions being necessarily connected to those volitions. We're not able to observe or conceive the tie which binds together the motion and volition, or the energy by which the mind produces this effect. Quote, we learn the influence of our will from experience alone, and experience only teaches us how the one event constantly follows another, without instructing us in the secret connection which binds them together and renders them inseparable. Hume then uses the same three arguments to show that causal powers are not evident in our ability to bring certain ideas and thoughts before the mind. First, our power to call up ideas is entirely beyond our comprehension. Second, we have more control over our ideas than we do over our sentiments and passions, but we do not know why. And third, is there not, either in a spiritual or material substance, or both, some secret mechanism or structure of parts upon which the effect depends, and which, in being entirely unknown to us, render the power or energy of the will equally unknown in incomprehensible? Hume concludes, our idea of power is not copied from any sentiment or consciousness of power within ourselves. Occasionalists such as Malebranche argue that God is the immediate cause of both the movement of physical bodies and the operations of our mind. All causes are occasions on which God intervenes. When billiards is being played, it is God that causes me to hit the white ball in a certain way, and it is the deity himself, they say, who by a particular volition moves the second ball. Physical objects or human minds do not have causal powers, only God does. According to these philosophers, everything is in full God and is full of God. Hume thinks this theory is conceived in fairyland. However, even if such a theory were persuasive, it would not help us in our search for the impression of necessary connection, since we are, quote, equally ignorant of the manner or force by which a mind, even the supreme mind, operates, either on itself or on a body. Hume has argued that necessity cannot be found in observable causal relations or in the operations of our minds or the actions of God. Thus, there appears not, throughout all nature, any one instance of connection which is conceivable by us. All events seem entirely loose and separate. One event follows from the other, but we never can observe any tie between them. They seem conjoined, but never connected. The energy of the cause is unintelligible. We only learn by experience the frequent conjunction of objects without being ever able to comprehend anything like connection between them. Let an object be presented to a man of ever so strong natural reason and abilities. If that object be entirely new to him, he will not be able, by the most accurate examination of its sensible qualities, to discover any of its causes or effects. In all single instances of the operation of bodies or minds, there is nothing that produces any impression, nor consequently can suggest any idea of power or necessary connection. C. The role of the imagination. We have not yet found the source of our idea of necessity. This is not something of which we have a priori knowledge, and it is not derived from a sensory impression or from an impression gained by reflecting on the operations of the mind, either ours or God's. There is, however, one last place to look, and that is in the imagination. In part 2 of this section, Hume argues that the impression of necessary connection is produced by the imagination after we have experienced a constant conjunction between two types of event. When we first encounter fire and heat, we do not take them to be necessarily or causally connected. However, after experiencing fire and heat together a good number of times, the mind is led by habit to expect heat whenever there is fire. This expectation cannot be justified by reason. We just find it natural to think in this way. We saw earlier how the associative mechanisms behind such thinking leads to belief. A further product of these habitual cognitive processes is a feeling of determination, a feeling that such a belief and expectation are inevitable and unavoidable. I feel that I cannot help but think. This feeling is the impression of necessary connection. Our idea, therefore, of necessity and causation arises entirely from the uniformity observable in the operations of nature, where similar objects are constantly conjoined together, and the mind is determined by custom to infer the one from the appearance of the other. After a repetition of similar instances, the mind is carried by habit upon the appearance of one event to expect its usual attendant and to believe that it will exist. This connection, therefore, which we feel in the mind, this customary transition of the imagination from one object to its usual attendant, is the sentiment or impression from which we form the idea of power or necessary connection. Nothing farther is in the case. End quote. However, we believe that things in the world stand in causal relations to each other, that fire causes heat, that a billiard ball causes another one to move, and not just that our minds slip easily from the experience of one to the thought of its usual accompaniment. But why do we think of the world in this way? Why do we think of objects themselves as causally related? Hume's answer is this. As we feel a customary connection between the ideas, we transfer that feeling to the objects, as nothing is more usual than to apply to external bodies every internal sensation which they occasion. In the treatise, Hume talks about the mind spreading itself on objects in the world. We project necessity onto the world. The ease with which the mind moves from A to B makes us believe that A's themselves are necessarily connected to B's. We are, however, mistaken. There is no empirical evidence. The only evidence that there can be for Hume that there are necessary connections actually in the world. When we say, therefore, that one object is connected with another, we mean only that they have acquired a connection in our thought. Hume's conclusions are problematic in various ways. First, it is not clear whether Hume has correctly identified the kind of thing that can constitute an impression of necessity. The mind may easily move from an impression of A to the thought of B, but this is simply a fluent movement or mental operation. It is not an impression, which for Hume is a type of perception. Second, Hume's account of causation is subjectivist. Our idea of necessity, an epistemological component of the idea of causation, is a product of the mechanisms of the mind. The consequence of such an account would therefore seem to be that if there were no minds, then there would be no causation. There would only be a certain types of objects constantly conjoined with others. Things do not have a causal effect on each other. They merely follow the one another in more or less regular patterns. In the treatise, Hume notes the problematic nature of this account. What? The efficacy of cause lies in the determination of the mind? as if causes did not operate entirely independent of the mind and would not continue their operation, even though there was no mind to exist, to contemplate them, or reason concerning them. Thought may well depend on causes for its operation, but not causes on thought. This is to reverse the order of nature and make that secondary, which is really primary. Some philosophers have argued that Hume does not believe in objective causal relations. Does not believe in objective causal connections between objects, and it is this new interpretation of Hume that we shall go on now to discuss. So I'm going to leave it there, and next time I'm going to do section D, the new Hume debate, the regulatory theory of causation. Till next time.